Welcome to Ageless and Outrageous, your favorite podcast about how to age amazingly. I'm urogynecologist and hormone and sexual health expert, Dr. Kristen Jackson. Every week, my incredible and knowledgeable nurse practitioner, Rosalind Arp, and I share our combined 30 years experience to guide both men and women as they age. Listen as we dive into a variety of topics, including hormone optimization, pelvic floor health, maintaining a vibrant sex life, weight gain issues, and skin, hair, and body changes as we age. These real-life insights are always rooted in solid scientific knowledge. Tune in for a dose of laughter, knowledge, and an honest perspective on the incredible adventure of growing older. Welcome, everyone. If you listen to our podcast, you know that we talk a lot about the fact that many women are unable to have an orgasm simply with vaginal penetration. Well, today we're going to go into the reasons for this, as well as many of the ways you can try to increase the chances of having an orgasm with vaginal penetration. Let's jump into this, Rosalind, because I think this is a topic that a lot of women have so much misinformation about.
Absolutely.
And I'm not sure why that is, but I would guess that a lot of it is perpetuated by entertainment and movies and media. Very often when we see sexual encounters in movies or media, you see a couple together and they're having penetration and the woman is clawing at her partner and just having this incredible orgasm. But we both know that is not the norm. While penetration can feel amazing and intimate, it may not be the activity that brings a majority of women close to orgasm.
Yes, I agree. Of course, everyone knows that men and women have different sexual organs, but the male and female sex organs come from the same structure when they are developing in a fetus. For example, the gonads, which are the ovaries or the testicles, come from the same structure. The structure just develops into testicles if there is a Y chromosome present, and into ovaries if there are only X chromosomes. The external sex organs generally all start from the same structure as well, and just develop based on the genes present. So the head of the penis and the clitoris came from the same structure. The shaft of the penis and the labia minora came from the same structure as well. So this makes it much easier to understand what type of stimulation are going to feel good for a woman. And this is actually how I explain to a woman I explain their genital parts based on a man's structure.
I know you love that analogy.
Mm-hmm. And it's funny because like women they're like, oh, like,
it makes it much easier to understand.
Mm-hmm. So imagine if you're providing stimulation for a male. If you just stimulate the shaft of the penis, it will feel nice, but it's not likely to bring him to orgasm. He needs direct stimulation of the head of the penis to do that. And it's the same for women. If you stimulate the labia majora and the labia minora, it will feel nice. But to really have her reach orgasm, she's going to need direct clitoral stimulation.
That's a great way to understand why direct clitoral stimulation is almost a guaranteed way to bring a woman to orgasm. Whether it's direct stimulation with fingers or a toy or a mouth, if the stimulation is done in a pleasurable way, you're going to get that woman to orgasm. If we think about the act of penetration, a penis going into the vagina is not always a guaranteed way to provide direct stimulation to the clitoris. It may provide nice stimulation to the labia minora and the introitus, which feels good, but it may leave the woman feeling far from orgasm. But if we can alter the anatomy a little, or change the stimulation, or add some stimulation, then we can provide what may be missing during penetration so that you are able to reach orgasm. So it's really all about how your anatomy is put together. If you're lucky enough to have a clitoris that is positioned such that it receives stimulation during penetration, then you are a woman who has a much higher chance of orgasm with penetration. But if your clitoris happens to be a little further away from the vaginal opening, then your chances are lower. Now, you might think that's just a theory, but we actually have data that supports it.
Yes, believe it or not. This was actually proposed as early as 1924. But it wasn't until 2011 when the data was finally analyzed. So the normal distance between the clitoris and the urethra varies quite a bit from woman to woman, ranging from 1.6 centimeters to 4.5 centimeters. When what an analysis of several studies has found was that when the distance between the clitoris and the urethra was shorter, women had an easier time reaching orgasm with penetration, which makes sense. But when the distance between the clitoris and the urethra was longer, women had a lower chance of orgasm with penetration alone. And in this study, they are using the urethra to mean the vaginal opening. So this would support the notion that if the clitoris is positioned anatomically closer to the vagina, then it has a higher chance of direct stimulation with penetration. To just let everybody know that the urethra is in between the clitoris and vaginal opening, because some women don't know that.
Right. So some women may be anatomically predisposed to experience orgasm from intercourse, while the anatomy of other women makes such orgasms unlikely. But there's even more data to suggest how this happens. We know that the genital tubercle, this is the tissue that develops into the clitoris in women or the head of the penis in men. This tubercle moves northward or away from what will be the vaginal opening during fetal development. Longer distances between the clitoris and the vaginal opening have been seen in women who are exposed to higher levels of androgens when they were fetuses. Male fetuses, of course, are exposed to high levels of prenatal androgens, so they have quite a bit of northward migration of the genital tubercle to become the penile head. It's almost as if prenatal exposure to androgens produces a slightly more male-like position of the clitoris. So just like men need direct stimulation of the penile head to reach orgasm, women with a clitoris that happens to be moved further away from the vaginal opening need more direct clitoral stimulation to reach orgasm.
And when you say androgens, you mean testosterone levels?
Exactly. And both male and female fetuses are exposed to testosterone while we're babies in our mom's uterus. Obviously, male fetuses are just exposed to a much higher level compared to female fetuses. But back in the 1920s, the original woman who did the clitoral to urethral measurements, her name was Marie Bonaparte. And she really wanted to be able to help women achieve penetration orgasm.
Go Marie.
I know, go in the 20s, huh? She herself was actually a woman who could not orgasm with penetration alone. She teamed up with a surgeon named Halbach to perform a surgery where the suspensory ligaments of the clitoris were divided to try to allow the clitoris to move downward or closer to the vaginal opening. Now, the surgery was only performed in 5 women, including Marie, the original female investigator, but it didn't prove to be very successful. And that's probably because when you cut the suspensory ligaments to the clitoris, you also cut through a lot of the nerves there too, so they likely desensitized the clitoris. But I love that Marie Bonaparte was such an advocate for positive female sexual experiences, even that long ago.
Yes, I agree.
So let's talk about some information we can give you to figure out how to make an orgasm with penetration more achievable for any woman. The first technique we're going to talk about is called double stimulation. This means providing direct clitoral stimulation at the same time penetration is happening. And there are several devices that can make that happen. Very often, when we start to talk about vibrators or other sex devices, people can get a little bit squeamish. It's still really considered taboo to discuss these things. But we want to help bring happy sex into the mainstream by whatever means necessary. And vibrators and sex devices that help to improve orgasm are no different than any other medical device we recommend.
Yes, so I agree 100%. I heard one of the main urologists, female urologist, who is a big advocate for sexual health, said, comparing like if you don't hear well, you use hearing aids, can't see well, you use glasses, and if you can't have an orgasm, you use vibrators. So yes, I try to make vibrators seem very less scary or off limits by comparing them to any other medical device someone may need.
And if you're new to vibrators, there are a whole menu of options out there. But in general, I tell patients to look for something that is small, quiet, waterproof, and has a variety of stimulation settings. But if you're looking specifically for a device to improve your chance of orgasm during penetration, you want to use a vibrator that is intended for use during penetrative sex. And lucky for us, there are several varieties that are intended just for this procedure. They are often shaped to cover the clitoris without blocking the opening to the vagina, or there are some versions that stimulate the clitoris and also the anterior vaginal wall during penetration. So there's a part for the outside and a part for the inside of the vibrator. These devices allow women to experience direct clitoral stimulation at the same time as penetration, significantly increasing her chances of orgasming.
So the second technique we're going to discuss is improved stimulation of the anterior vaginal wall, since this is where the famed G-spot is located. But experts are still trying to decide if the G-spot is real or myth, but does it exist in all women and is its own separate structure? Just so we're clear, when we say the anterior vaginal wall, we mean the top of the vagina. That means if a woman's laying down and if you put something in her vagina and press up towards her pubic bone or belly button, you're touching the anterior vaginal wall.
A German doctor named Ernst Graffenberg first described this spot, supposedly an inch or two inside the vagina on the anterior wall in 1953. And while he has been immortalized by the G spot being named after him, he was actually a pioneer in all parts of women's health. He developed an early form of the IUD made of surgical silk and silver filaments, which was called Graffenberg's ring. And the later models of his ring happened to be more successful than the earlier ones because, unbeknownst to him, the silver had become contaminated with copper. And as luck would have it, copper is enormously effective in preventing pregnancy, as it acts as an anti-inflammatory spermicide.
Oh my gosh, that's crazy. Like when penicillin was discovered by accident, now we're accidentally discovering contraceptive methods.
Exactly. And now we have an IUD that's fully made of copper.
Yeah.
So the problem with the identification of the G spot is that it led to the belief that there are two separate types of orgasms women can achieve: a vaginal orgasm and a clitoral orgasm. Meaning, some women can reach orgasm just by stimulating the clitoris, and some women can reach orgasm just by stimulating the vagina. And it's probably not that binary. Even Graffenberg didn't share this view. He wrote that, quote, "We can almost say that there is no part of the female body which does not give sexual response. The partner only has to find the erotic zones."
Oh, that's amazing. I agree on that. Yes, every woman's different.
Exactly.
Um, and many women have told me that if they are properly aroused, that they can be strongly stimulated by just touching their nipples or just by touching their labia or another specific place.
So experiment and find out, right?
Exactly.
Science has been trying to determine the reality of the G spot for some time. In the 1980s, some studies could identify it, whereas others could not. If you combine all of those studies, the G spot was identified in more than half of the women. When it was identified, it was reported as a swelling in the anterior vaginal wall. Now, as you can imagine, those types of studies can have some challenges. Trying to reproduce those studies or repeat them today would be majorly unethical because the researcher would need to be sexually stimulating the female subjects. And then also, many women might be inhibited or not have their normal sexual response if they're being stimulated in an experimental environment.
I can't imagine that. being the experimenter.
Or the
Um,
experimentee.
or the experimentee, I guess, yes. But I really have to feel grateful to women who agreed to do these studies because this is how our knowledge of female sexual response expands. But yes, we do need a lot more studying to do.
I agree. But beyond using stimulation to identify the G spot, I think using ultrasound might be a little more scientific. Ultrasound does show us that there is a descent or a lowering of the anterior vaginal wall during penetration. Now, that makes sense because this type of movement would try to increase the contact between the anterior vaginal wall and whatever is penetrating the vagina. So, this has led to a new concept, the clitoro-urethro-vaginal complex, recognizing that all of these organs, the clitoris, the urethra, and the vagina, can be involved in orgasmic stimulation. And it unifies the role of the anterior vaginal wall stimulation with clitoral stimulation. So these are probably not two different or distinct orgasms, but rather some form of a continuous stimulation of sexual areas. So the bottom line is, if we can enhance stimulation of the anterior vaginal wall, that in turn is going to improve clitoral blood flow and stimulation and make orgasm easier no matter what. So how can we do that?
Well, very often the penis just does not provide enough focus stimulation to the anterior vaginal wall. So this is where we can have some changes to help it. If you're in a man on top position, the woman can place a small pillow under her butt to tilt her pelvis forwards. forward, and this forces the penis to make more contact with the anterior vaginal wall with each penetration. If you're a woman on top position, you can change your motion from an up and down thrusting one to a more of a forward grinding motion, which actually a lot of people do.
Mm-hmm. They figure it out on their own.
On your own, yes. I think that's why a lot of women prefer being on top, because they can find the spot that works the best. And most women will say moving forward, leaning forward helps.
Exactly.
You can also use your body weight to force more pressure against the anterior vaginal wall, which a bonus in this position. And then another trick is to only have your partner insert the head of the penis in and out of the vagina. Don't thrust all the way into the vaginal canal. In doing so, he's concentrating that stimulation right on that anterior vaginal wall, and that can be really intensify the stimulation as well.
The final technique we'll discuss is lifting the pelvic floor. And this one's kind of a two-parter. If your pelvic floor is stronger and lifted in general, then it's naturally going to force the penis or whatever's in the vagina to have better friction against the anterior vaginal wall. Traditional Kegel exercises will activate the pelvic floor, but they won't make it stronger than it once was. This is where we really need some focused energy, like using the electromagnetic stimulation from the Emsella chair to lift and hypertrophy the muscles of the pelvic floor.
Emsella chair is one of the most popular treatments we have in our office. You sit on the Emsella chair and it sends electromagnetic energy through the pelvic floor muscles, creating thousands and thousands of contractions. This produces hypertrophy or growth of that muscle. And then the MRI studies of the pelvic floor have shown the thickening and lifting of the muscle after a series of treatments.
And once your pelvic floor muscles are stronger, then you can start using them during penetration to get better anterior vaginal wall stimulation. Start by contracting your pelvic floor a little bit during penetration. See how that feels as you drive the penis against the anterior vaginal wall. And then you can play around with it and try contracting a little more or contracting and releasing to see what gives you the most stimulation. As you can imagine, the stronger your pelvic floor is, the more muscles you have to work with when you're trying this technique. One caveat, though, is that if you are a patient who has vaginal or pelvic pain due to vaginismus or a high-tone pelvic floor, I would not recommend this technique. Because if your pelvic floor is already too tight all the time, we don't want you exacerbating the situation by trying to tighten it further.
Those are all great techniques for people to try. If you have trouble reaching orgasm during penetration, but you'd really like to get there, don't forget that the best technique may be a combination of 2 or 3 of all the options we've discussed. So, for example, using a vibrator that provides double stimulation and contracting your pelvic floor muscle, or elevating your hip with a pillow and missionary and using a penetration vibrator. You get the picture. Have fun playing around with all the options to see what works best for you.
Thanks so much for listening to today's episode. No information from this recording is intended as a diagnosis or treatment for any disease. If you are enjoying the show, please subscribe so you don't miss any of our exciting episodes. And we love to hear from our listeners and would be grateful for your positive review. We'll talk next time.